Now, turn your Bibles to James chapter 2, and I want you to follow along. I'm going to read verses 14 to the end of the chapter because even though this is kind of a long section, it all holds together with one theme. And so what we'll do in our lesson, we'll try to hit the highlights with the theme that holds this paragraph together. But I want to start reading with verse 14 and follow along. James 2:14. What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food, and if one of you says to him, "Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith and I have deeds." Well, show me your faith without deeds, and I'll show you my faith by what I do. You believe that there's one God. Well, good. Even the demons believe that and tremble or shudder. You foolish man, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Well, was not our ancestor Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And he was called God's friend. You see that a person is justified by what he does and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and then sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. Wow. That's a strong section, isn't it? As one Christian writer said, just believing ain't gonna get it done. I heard that. Well, let's talk about what that means, because this is amazing. This is the passage that really gave Martin Luther fits. He didn't like this section, and as a result, he made the comment, James is a right strawy epistle, which meant it didn't have much content in it, really didn't have place in the canon of the New Testament. He didn't like James. Well, let's look at what James is saying. Because, and I hope you caught this, apparently, if we're able to put together what James is saying, we will be called a friend of God. Abraham was called a friend of God. Why? Because he did the very thing that James is illustrating. So we need to see what that is, because I think that sounds pretty important, doesn't it? And it may have been in the early congregation here that James is writing to. Because of the way it's worded, it almost sounds like there was some strong argument going on among that congregation about what faith really meant. And with it being a Jewish Christian congregation, you could imagine some people were saying, well, listen, I've always been one of God's people, and I have the right faith, so don't tell me what to do. Well, James is coming back and says, well, it's not just believing. There's more to it than believing the right content. Okay? In certain studies, here's what it's called. The technical term is orthodoxy and orthopraxis, if you've heard that phrase, which means right belief and right practice. Here's the thing that's strange. You realize you can believe the right thing and you can believe the right thing but do the wrong thing? That happens. Or on the other hand, You might do the right thing, but not believe right. So there's those two possibilities. And what James is arguing for is, I want you to believe the right thing, but I also want you to do the right thing and bring those together so that it's an integrated faith. I'm a woodworker, so I love the imagery of dovetail. If you know what dovetails look like, if they really fit together, faith and works are beautiful when they're fit together, like James is talking about. A living, useful faith is contrasted here by a dead, useless faith. For too many Christians, listen to this statement. For too many Christians, God has already performed the funeral with their dead body in the casket labeled useless dead faith. That's pretty strong, isn't it? Faith by itself is useless. And this reminds us, when we were studying the book of Hebrews, there's something that occurs in chapter 11 of Hebrews that we notice because it's significant. Remember the phrase over and over and over again, by faith. It would have by faith and then the name of a person and then followed by a verb of action. By faith, so-and-so did something. And so in Hebrews chapter 11, you see that beautiful integration of faith and action. And this is what James is arguing for. So what is faith that's alive? We want to focus on living faith. Well, we have some key markers in this paragraph, and I want to raise them for us to think about this morning. First, faith that's alive is accompanied by specific action to physical needs. We're going to hammer on this because this is so crucial. He says, suppose someone comes into your congregation, and remember earlier he talked about it with showing favoritism, but now suppose someone says, or suppose someone asks, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds, suppose a brother or sister then comes into your setting needing food or clothes, what do you do? Well, you could say, go your way. I hope the best for you. Hope you find food. Hope you find clothes. I wish you well. No, the need here is clothing and daily food. And the response that James is arguing against is it's almost like someone, well, I wish you well, but don't bother me. I hope you find what you need. This is a hard, practical truth that living faith, and we need to hear this, and I probably didn't hear this strong enough throughout my young life, but living faith responds to the needs of others. I want you to think about why we're saved. A lot of people think we're saved from sin, and the Bible certainly presents that. I'm not arguing against that. But it's not just the idea that we're saved from something. Do you realize the Bible makes even a stronger case in the New Testament? We're saved for something. We need to hear that. Salvation is from something, yes. Sin, devil, judgment, all that stuff. We're saved from that. But what are we saved for? James is going to make a strong case that if you have a faith that's a living faith, you're saved for one of the many things. And it's interesting. We probably need to have a whole sermon on that. What am I saved for? Because there's a bunch of things. This is one of them. We're saved for being God's people. We're saved for responding to the needs of others. Let me tell you where Paul he hits this hard. In Ephesians, he talks about those of you who stole, don't steal anymore. Find a job so that you may have money to give to those who are in need. Paul, in Ephesians, wants some of his readers to quit, we would say, shoplifting. There were people that tried to make it all the time by just ripping stuff off, and that's how Paul said, when you're a Christian, you can't steal anymore. That's off the table. I want you to find a job. But guess what? It's not just so that you can meet your own bills and keep you from stealing. He says, I want you to work so that you can give to those that are in need. How? So we're saved to help others in their need. One major aspect of faith that we learn about in the book of James is that it is ready to respond to the person's need that's in front of us. Faith is alive when it's shown by our deeds. These deeds, these works, these actions that we respond with, they're not heroic. I mean, James is not asking us to act like a Superman or a Superwoman, jump off the building and no, here's what it highlights. It highlights the magnitude of small deeds. Small things make a big difference. And we need to hear that often. This is tied to the second commandment. First, we love God with all our heart, mind, and soul and strength. The second is like it. Jesus says, you love your neighbor as yourself. The faith that has no deeds is contrasted then with the faith that has deeds. Faith is not just something you hold on to. I've often heard people say, too many of us as Christians hold on to our faith like a football player does running down the football field. We've got it like this and you're not going to get it. Well, no. Faith is what we believe, and we extend our hands out to others like this. It makes a whole world of difference. Ooh, faith that is alive does more than the demons or the devils. James develops this idea with a shocking reality. See, if you're going to be just content with belief or belief about God, then guess what? You've thrown yourself in the lot with the demons or the devils. They have just enough faith to tremble and shudder. James doesn't go on explaining this, but I want you to think about this for a moment. Why would the demons tremble or shudder with their level of belief? I think the implication is pretty clear. They know what their end is. They know that just believing about God is not going to keep them from eternal punishment. They know what's coming, they know who God is. So they tremble and they shudder. So what James' point is, just saying I believe in God, that's not going to get it done. Think of how many people today fall in this category. Well, I believe in God, but isn't that all that counts? Not according to James. It's got to be a lot more than that. Okay? Let me give you a little sidebar here about the demons. He doesn't, well, I wish James had done this. Did he give us a footnote about who these demons and devils are? He didn't explain them. But from best that we know, he's talking about a spirit that's inferior to God, superior to men, an evil spirit, or messengers or ministers of the devil. I didn't know this, I found this, that according to Jewish opinion, which may have passed over and through Jewish Christians, there was the belief that the demons really were the gods of the Gentiles, and that the devils were responsible for all the idolatry in the world that the Jews hated. But I want you to notice here that James is pointing out people who are just like the demons if you only believe. Do you know that in the Gospels, in Jesus' ministry, these demons or devils are mentioned 50 to 60 times in between that category, about 50 or 60. And it's almost like, because we only have in the Old Testament a couple of references to demons and devils. So kind of like on the radar screen, blip, blip. Then all of a sudden, when Jesus is here in his ministry, I mean, everywhere you look, there's mention about these evil spirits and these demons and these ministers of evil. And then when Jesus goes back into heaven, in the book of Acts, there's one or two little more references, blip, blip, to the evil spirits, and then it's gone. And I think it doesn't take much to see that when Jesus was here on earth, guess what? Jesus or Satan unleashed everything he had to try and destroy Jesus and what he was all about. Well, you know who won that battle. A living faith, according to James, is useful instead of useless. Let's see, what verse was that? Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, verse 20. You foolish man, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? See, this word useless is used by Matthew in Matthew 20, verses 3 through 6, in the parable that Jesus tells about the worker standing in the marketplace, useless, waiting for somebody to come along and hire them for the day. So can you imagine what it's like? You're standing around. You don't think like you're, not work very much. I don't have a job today. I'm useless. I'm just standing there. Well, it's the same word used for faith, but it's not active. It's just useless. In James 1:26, we've already encountered the description of a worthless religion. What God's after is true religion. The worthless religion is the one that doesn't care for the orphans and the widows. And notice that this idea in James 1:26, caring for, it's a verb of action. This living faith that we're talking about was seen in Abraham. And most of us know the story of Abraham. It's a pretty familiar one to us. God told Abraham to go offer his son Isaac on the mountain. Abraham went. That was the first step of action. What if Abraham had said to God, well, God, I believe, that I need a sacrifice. And I know that you're wanting me to sacrifice Isaac. I believe in you. That's enough. Let's not go through with this. But notice what happened. In the story, what's the point at which God intervenes? Remember, he's got the knife in his hand. Isaac is bound on the altar, ready to be slain and sacrificed. The Lord stays his hand. He's in action, ready to do something as a response to his belief in God. And God stopped that because he sees Abraham. The reason righteousness was credited to him, not only did it motivate what Abraham wanted to do, it was proof to God that Abraham really believed. He was ready to take action. Okay? Now, not only Abraham, but look at the other illustration. It was seen in Rahab. And if you go back in chapter 2 of Joshua, we read all about Rahab the prostitute. There was an advanced scouting party that came into the territory. Joshua and his men wanted to scout things out, and Rahab becomes a partner in this process. And what's amazing is she's a Gentile sinner that's lifted up as righteous. I've often wondered how well this example went over with these Jewish Christians that James is writing to. Jesus got himself into trouble. Remember Luke chapter 4, when he talks about the Spirit of the Lord being upon him. He talks about his ministry. And then he talks about the way God worked in the past. Naaman, the Syrians, and the others that he mentions. Every person, and you may look at that incident in Luke 4 and you think, why was the audience so angry at Jesus? All he did was quote scripture and tell a story. But if you look at the end there in Luke 4, what did they do? They tried to throw him off the bluff at the end of the city of Jerusalem and kill him. You're like, wow, what happened? Well, if you go back and check his examples, every single example he uses was a Gentile. Now, the story is in the Old Testament, so they knew the story. I doubt they liked the stories. They probably pretended they weren't there. But Jesus lifts them up as God working through him and his ministry to reach those kind of people. Well, they didn't want to hear that. And I suspect that the Jewish Christians that heard this little example, Rahab the prostitute, they're like, James, what are you doing? That would not have been her faith. Now, they loved Abraham. Yes, yes, yes. Let's talk about Abraham being a wonderful example. But Rahab? Oh, my. Well, guess what? We may wrestle with that too, even today, because asking the question, how can a sinner be used by God? Guess what? We're all sinners. And when we respond by faith and we honor God, God can use us. I found it fascinating, and y'all may know the classic book called The Scarlet Letter. Okay. Did you realize that I just picked up on it this week? Rahab drops down out the window, and this is interesting because apparently she has a house that's up against the city wall, and it's got an outdoor window. You know, wow. So normally what that meant was she was probably in the house of someone who had a lot of power, because you spend a lot of man hours and people guarding that vulnerable place where someone could come in. But did you catch, you remember in the story, she lets down out the window a scarlet cord. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's where the author of Scarlet Letter got that idea. But she lets that out as a sign, and she's participating in God's bigger plan. It's interesting too, because you know good and well that Rahab didn't know God's greater plan, but at her level, she was participating in it. So, living faith, seen in Abraham, seen in Rahab, faith that is alive has important actions connected with it. Otherwise, it's like a dead body. I want you to listen to his conclusion. In fact, his conclusion is wrapped up in an illustration. It's kind of powerful. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. It's an illustration. When the spirit leaves the human body, what happens? There's a dead body. Well, what happens with faith if deeds leave the life of faith? Well, James says it's dead faith. See, rather, the specific point that James is addressing here is people claiming to be people of faith, but their faith does not respond to pressing human needs. That kind of faith is dead, it's useless, and it's worthless, are all the words that James uses in chapters 1 and 2. Faith that is dead, faith that is useless, faith that is worthless. Now, it's interesting, there's some research going on that's being published right now, not only by Barna, but other research groups. And there's this trumpet sound of alarm going out that Christianity in America is going down, and you can see it by the attendance in churches where large buildings are empty. Well, I always have trouble with some of these research things because is faith boiled down to attendance? Now, I would say in a heartbeat that your being in the assembly would be an action that comes out of a life of faith, and you certainly would want to do that. But I can't imagine that we would even envision faithful Christianity living out its faith only being narrowed down to attendance. I mean, it's a lot more than that. It's got to be a lot more than that. We have to do more than just claim that we have faith. We have to allow our faith to define, motivate, and activate us to respond to those in need. That's why I'm thrilled with things like our community blessing box coming together. The example, some of you have already been participating in the Friday meals. They're being prepared here in town. We participate in the food drive for the Tennessee Children's Home, and it goes on and on. And I remember, I didn't know this because I was out here with Randy and Brent. I didn't know this happened, but when our fellowship meal was over, someone came in off the street hungry, and you all responded to that. That is faith responding. That's the kind of thing we need to encourage, that we are light in a dark world, and wherever pressing human needs occur, we respond to those. Now, and this is a whole different lesson. I don't have time to pursue this. Having a faithful response to a pressing human need doesn't mean we always have to give them what they're asking for. Because a lot of times what they really need may be beyond what they're asking. And I've just kind of made it a rule of thumb. I don't hand out cash anymore. And that's my decision. If you do, that's okay. I'm telling you my decision. That's because a lot of times what a person really needs is not just cash. They need more than that. I've invited people, to lunch, sat down and paid their lunch. We had fellowship with that. Taken their van and filled it up with gas instead of just giving them cash. But making sure that I'm part of the solution, not part of the ongoing problem. You hear what I'm saying? We want to be truly helpful, not enabling them in wrong choices. But we all know this. Our challenge each day that we live is to recognize where human needs occur, and God is calling us. And think about it, it's not going to hit the front page of the newspaper, and that's okay. That's not what it's for. We respond to human needs because that's one of the things we're saved for. We're telling God, I'm here as one of your ambassadors. I'm here as your faithful child. I'm here for you to work through me to make an impact on other people. So what have we learned about faith that's alive? Well, it is accompanied by specific actions that respond to physical needs. And that living faith is defined by our actions. Because we don't want to be like the demons, the devils, just to believe. It's more than that. It is thinking of our faith being true religion, helpful, and useful. And that's the way God wants us to be, as servants. We see Abraham. When you talk about faith, it took a lot of faith and action to do what he did. We see Rahab being used by God in a significant moment in the history of God's people. So to have deeds and actions that come out of our faith, that's where our faith is alive. That's why we encourage one another. Otherwise, we're just dead faith. But we don't want to have dead faith. We don't want that to define us. We want to have faith that is alive and vigorous and responsive. So in the invitation, are we ready to come to God and Jesus because our hearts are touched with a living faith that's ready to act? Maybe you need prayers for that. And our exhortation is to let us embrace the kind of life where the grace of God and the divine gift of wisdom helps us understand and practice the Christian life of mercy that is constantly looking out for others in need. And our prayer wish is that God can grant us the wisdom, grant us the courage, and the tenacity of faith to embrace this kind of life that seeks to deeply care about those in need, whether they're widows or orphans or somebody just hungry or somebody needs some clothes, whatever it is. We say, God, we want to be your servant.